In Chapter 4, we discuss the history of police. Now we are going to switch gears and we are going to talk about police organization and their role and functions. The general organization, what we're going to start with, municipalities are independent agencies. All police departments are independent agencies. They're not connected to each other. The city of Plattsburgh Police Department isn't connected to the New York State troopers. They're all independent under their different municipalities, but they all exist within the executive branch of that government. So if we're talking about the FBI, it's part of the executive branch alongside of the president oversees. If we're talking about the New York State Troopers, we're talking about the governor of the state of New York. We're talking about the city of Plattsburgh, we're talking about the mayor, and in that executive branch organization. Okay, they don't have any authority or controls. The government doesn't have any authority or controls over them. They govern themselves, even though they're in the executive branch. Like the police chief of the city is hired by the mayor, but the mayor doesn't control how the police department runs. That's the chief. They have their own rules, they have their own practices, they have their own procedures. They are funded by the municipality, though, and money filters down from the state level and from the federal level. However, even though they work independently of each other, the different agencies, the different law enforcement agencies, they do work together and they can work jointly. The states work with the feds work with the states. I alluded to an example in the last lecture. The Adirondack, we have an organization called the Adirondack Drug Task Force, and it's made up of a number of law enforcement agencies. The Plattsburgh City Police Department has 2 detectives assigned to the task force on a full-time basis. The task force is also comprised of law enforcement agencies from the state troopers, the Clinton County Sheriff's Department, the Essex County Sheriff's Department, which is a neighboring county to our south if you're sitting in Plattsburgh, New York State Police, I think I mentioned them, the Drug Enforcement Administration, Homeland Security, and the United States Border Patrol all sit on this Adirondack Drug Task Force. And the main objective to the task force is the investigation of individuals and organizations that are involved in trafficking drugs, and seizing any assets that are acquired through trafficking of drugs, or the promotion and coordinating of narcotics enforcement is another aspect, and they coordinate with other law enforcement agencies if needed. Now we are close to the border. We're also neighboring with Vermont, and in some instances, if we're dealing with trafficking that involves coming in on the water, we might have the Coast Guard involved, because Lake Champlain goes all the way south and all the way up to the Canadian border. So these folks can all work together, and I'm going to direct you to the graph in the book. I tried to get one up on my slide, didn't work for me. Vestal, New York hierarchy gave us the structure of a very small police department. Vestal, New York is in Broome County, which is in the southern tier. Binghamton is in Broome County, if you need a reference point. And it's a very small police station, right? It has your chief, you have your investigators, maybe a detective, and you have patrol under a lieutenant, but it's a very small makeup. The city of Plattsburgh is a very small makeup as well. And then you get a big city, like New York City, and it's the same hierarchy of structure. They just might have more members in that. They might have more detectives, and they might have more lieutenants, and they might have more patrol, but it's still the same structure. And regardless of what type of agency we're talking about, the top cop is going to be the chief of police or the commissioner. Even the Department of Justice and the FBI recognize their top cop as a commissioner or a chief of police. Let's talk about some pros and cons. These are civil service organizations, and the key to any civil service organization is the features regarding it is that you move up the chain or you get promoted through the process based on your seniority and the time that you've had in other positions. So you can't go to the police academy and come out and say, I want to be the chief or the sergeant. You have to start at the bottom. So you're either on the beat or you're in patrol. And you have to work your way up. You return to that graph in the book. You need a number of years of experience just to get to sergeant. And then you even need a number of years before you get to lieutenant or even a detective or an investigator. In the New York State Troopers, you need 10 years before you can become an investigator in patrol. So you think that's a good system? This seniority ranking. There are certainly pros and cons. Pros, fairness. There's no favorites here. Stability. Once your rank is earned, it's hard to be removed from it. We'd have to be doing something pretty awful, heinous, egregious, like corruption. So once you've moved up there, it's hard to be removed. It also prevents the loss of experienced officers to other departments. You may be offered more money to move or more incentives. This kind of prevents that because you can't go from patrol to, I'm going to be the sergeant over here in this other agency. And of course, there's cons. Flexibility. Lacks flexibility. Talented folks can't accelerate up the ranks like they otherwise would in a private sector. Versus, looking at what's the best interest of our police organization. We take this, superstar and move them up. But on the other side of that is when you hire an outside person that has skills, you can't put them in the higher position. You have to put them in a lower rank. So if you are on patrol in the city of Plattsburgh for a number of years and you want to become a New York State Trooper, certainly you can move over, but you got to start in patrol. You don't kind of get the same. Certainly they love your experience with the city police that you have acquired, but you can't just jump right in. You have to start all over again. This is a very conservative system. So I pose this question. How many of you think that the police work primarily involves crime fighting? They fight crimes. And I think that is a dramatic view of police. I believe television has made law enforcement's job look sexy alongside the prosecutors, and they've made defense attorneys look horrible. That's really not the case in any of those positions. What the police, we'll talk about the prosecutors and the defense attorneys in chapters to come. But let's finish talking about the police folks here. I mean, television makes them, and movies make them look pretty badass. But a lot of them, what they do is administrative work and tasks, and they take complaints and they respond to calls and disturbances and traffic issues and noise violations, and arrests get made, but that's not their primary function. And not all police can make arrests or do make arrests. Detectives, their sole job is to investigate. They may get a tip and they might put a ball in motion and they might investigate, but they don't make the arrest. So we'll put everything out of our head that we've learned about law enforcement on television and books and movies. We'll put that aside and we'll talk about the functions. And in this lecture, we're going to focus on the patrol function, and then we'll move on to the investigation function. So, patrol. These are the groups of officers we see. These are the people on the ground, right? They're in the public eye. They're out and about. They're in their cars. They're walking around, and they make up the majority of the police department. So what do? What's their purpose? They, by their physical presence, they deter crime. That's their goal. That's a purpose, primary purpose. If you are in Plattsburgh and you go downtown, watch for them downtown. There's actually a one of the offices downtown is the police beat office. If you go down there on a Friday night or on a weekend night, they are there and they're walking and they're patrolling. Their job is to maintain order within their area, the peacekeepers. They respond quickly to violations or emergencies. They identify and apprehend law violators. They also come to the aid of individuals and care for those who cannot help themselves. Like I've seen law enforcement pulled over to help somebody change a flat tire. They also help with disabled vehicles. They facilitate movement of traffic and people if an area gets congested. And overall, they create a feeling of security in the community. That is the purposes of patrol. So what types of activities? Let's roll through these specifically. Peacekeepers. Peacekeeping. That's the bulk of their job. They're the ones that ultimately decide if arrest should be made when an incident occurs. They could issue a warning, they can issue a citation ticket, or they can make an arrest. They, like I said, they have a great deal of discretion. How they handle the situation is key. They have to keep control, but they also can't appear as though they're not doing much at all either, right? They have to kind of walk this fine line. Keep the peace, keep control, but also not appear as though they're just hanging out. Usually their governing force is determined by somebody higher up because they are the low man on the totem pole, low person on the totem pole. It's selective enforcement. That's what's practiced. And when to make an arrest is dictated by office policy. So, depending on the area that the agency is in, you may see more arrests with a certain kind of crime over others. In Plattsburgh, you will get arrested for disorderly conduct if you disobey the warning first. So their guidance is you warn somebody, all right, get out of calm down, move along, you're being disruptive, disturbing the peace, and if you're asked a second time, you're going to get a disorderly conduct. I highly doubt that occurs in New York City, right? A lot more people, it's a lot busier, the threshold's higher for disturbing the lower than for disturbing the peace than it would be in Plattsburgh. Before pot was legalized here, you got arrested in Plattsburgh for possessing pot or a pot pipe or any such item relative to the possession of marijuana. That doesn't happen in New York City and didn't happen in New York City. So, depending on where you are, depending what the dictation is from the hierarchy, the patrol has their marching orders. Now, I want to direct your attention to a little box on page 111. It's a discussion about stop, question, and frisk. This is a a little stickler for patrol. Does a patrol stopping, questioning, and frisking of an individual deter crime? That seems to be the magic question, right? I will say that crime, no, I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is, does crime go down as a result of court decisions about constitutionality of these stop and frisk rules, or does it go up? Or could there be other factors that come into play? Is there too much focusing on one area? Maybe crime was going down anyway. But there's two cases. This is a hot button topic, and the Supreme Court did address it in Terry versus Ohio. I'm going to give you a snapshot version of it. An officer noticed Mr. Terry, this is in the state of Ohio, officer noticed the petitioner, who is Terry, our defendant, talking with another individual on a street corner while repeatedly walking up and down the same street. The men would periodically peer into a store window and then talk some more. The men also spoke to a third man, whom they eventually followed up the street. The officer believed that the petitioner and the other men were, quote-unquote, casing a store for a potential robbery. The officer decided to approach the men for questioning, and given the nature of the behavior, the officer decided to perform a quick search of the men before questioning. A quick frisk of Mr. Terry produced a concealed weapon, and that person was ultimately charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Is that okay? That was the question. Was that okay? Can the law enforcement patrol walk up to somebody that they suspect might be about to commit a crime and then search them? And the question the Supreme Court addressed was whether a search for weapons without probable cause for arrest is unreasonable search under the Fourth Amendment. And the court said, yes, that it is reasonable search for an officer under the circumstances performs a quick search and seizure and a quick seizure and a limited search for weapons. It's only for weapons on a person that the officer reasonably believes could be armed. A typical beat officer would be unduly burdened by being prohibited from searching individuals that the officer suspects to be armed. So, based on those facts, the officer reasonably believed that a robbery was about to happen. And a potential robbery could give somebody the belief that the person was carrying a weapon. So the search can be done without probable cause for an arrest, because nothing happened. There was no... But before questioning, the police can search for weapons. For weapons. It was very clear where you do not want to put law enforcement in a dangerous situation. So that's Terry versus Ohio. That is our law still, and it's from 1968. That is still our law relative to stop and frisk. Now, the other case that's cited in that box, Floyd versus New York City implemented a practice, a protocol from higher up to the patrol that they have to meet this quota of doing so many pat and frisks per month. I'm just going to summarize the case because the case is quite long. And there were two African-American men who started a class action suit, which means there's a whole bunch of other minority plaintiffs in this case. They sued for millions of dollars the New York City Police Department, saying what they did was civil rights violation. And what it came down to was that, and the federal court in New York ruled in their favor, showing that the New York City Police Department actually had rules with regards to stop and frisk, and not only just stop and frisk, but stop and frisk minorities. And there was a lot of testimony from former patrol that was the rule, and that's what they were required to do, regardless of whether or not they thought that there was some suspicion of a weapon or any sort of conduct. So they were successful, and the city police stopped doing the stop and frisk. It decreased significantly, and based on that information, that really hadn't affected crime in New York City. So the question becomes whether or not stopping and questioning and frisking deters crime. So explore that a little more. That is a big area for law enforcement, is stopping and frisking. So improving patrol functions. Does the mere presence of police actually deter crime? I don't think them just hanging out does it. Nope. It's how they actually approach their task that makes the difference, right? How they handle the situation. The more aggressive approach or a proactive approach seems to show that lower crime rates result. So the department that issues those tickets for traffic violations, disorderly conducts, are more likely to experience less of the serious stuff. It also increases the perception that there are lots of arrests and most violators are caught. Proactive policing, that suggests that there are more convictions, more criminals off the streets, hence less crime. So that's proactive, when they take a proactive approach, proactive policing. And direct patrolling, is that always good? We have police departments that work and target a specific crime, and that can help prevent more serious crimes, where there's more arrests made for carrying guns in high crime areas. Maybe they put more patrol in those areas. Oh, maybe this is where the frisk and traffic stops happen more effectively. So the effectiveness of patrol, I got it there big and bold. The effectiveness of patrol is an active research question. So the more that they are involved and engaged in making arrests, not only are they maintaining the peace and being the peacekeepers, but research shows that the crime rate goes down in those areas. Are there disadvantages of being proactive in arrests and handing out tickets for everything versus maybe a warning? Does it become more hostile between those proactive cops and the public? Less respect for the law enforcement? Do the advantages of proactive policing outweigh those disadvantages of basically just having a hostile or an antagonistic relationship between the cops and the public? There is a lot of law enforcement in the North Country. So there's always seems to be a lot of patrol. It's very active in this area. We have our city, just our law. We have City of Plattsburgh Police. We have a university police for the SUNY campus. We have New York State Troopers. We have the county sheriff. They all patrol within the bounds of the City of Plattsburgh. So the likelihood of running into law enforcement is great in Plattsburgh. Also, the North Country is the training ground for our New York State Troopers, so we have a few more state troopers in the various counties up here. But you can encounter any one of those just in the City of Plattsburgh. Lake Placid, and adding for Lake Placid, they have a village police. So there's another layer over there. All right, we just talked about proactive policing and directed patrol. A few more things, getting a little long on this particular video here, but I want to cover these last few things. Making arrests is the other thing that patrol does. What about arrests? Can making arrests reduce crime? Meaning, if you were arrested once, would it deter you from committing another crime? There's mixed views based on this research. Why would it deter crime? Maybe news that police are actively making arrests, so someone doesn't actually go out and commit crimes. There's actually evidence, especially when we're talking about a crime like DWI, driving while intoxicated, there's actually a good chance of repeat offending. People do learn the first time around, but there are some offenses that appear to be more repetitive than others. What about rapid response? Rapid response to 911 calls when there's a crime in progress. Does that increase the likelihood that the offender will be apprehended? Actually, that has no effect on the probability of capturing the offender. Think about that one for a second. It has no effect on crime. 911. If you're calling 911, would you think there's an emergency? Has anyone ever called 911? It's not just police, it's fire, it's ambulance, it's their dispatch. But the crime could have already happened before it's discovered, right? Your car is stolen while you slept, and then it's found down by the lake, vandalized. Your house was robbed while you're on vacation. The case can go cold rather quickly. You actually have to see it, and I think patrol would actually have to see it happening, like an assault taking place. It'd have to be in progress. But no effect on crime, calling 911 and the police getting there. Most of the time you're calling 911, the perpetrator's running away, getting out of there. The broken windows policy. Let's talk about that for a moment. What is it, and why might it be successful? The model describing the role of police as peacekeepers or maintainers of the community order and safer. That's what this broken windows policy stems around. It's a model describing the role of the police as peacekeepers and the maintainers of community order and safety. So what is it? What is this policy? It was first described in 1982. The model focuses on the importance of disorder, i.e. broken windows, they call it, disorder. The importance of disorder in generating and sustaining more serious crime. Disorder is not directly linked to serious crime. Instead, disorder leads to increased fear and withdrawal from the residents if there's disorder, which then allows more serious crime to move in because the decreased level of informal social control. The police play a role in disrupting this broken windows, this process. If they focus in on the disorder and less serious crime in neighborhoods that have not yet been overtaken by serious crime, they can help reduce fear and resident withdrawal. Promoting higher levels of informal social control will help residents themselves take control of their neighborhood and prevent serious crime from coming in. What do we think about the broken windows policy? This has been applied in various ways. Perhaps the most prominent adoption of the broken windows approach to crime and disorder was in New York City. In other agencies, the broken windows policy has been synopsis with a zero tolerance policing, in which disorder is aggressively policed and all violators are ticketed and arrested, like the more proactive policing. Another concern is how to properly measure broken windows treatment. The most frequent indicator of broken windows policing has been misdemeanor arrests, in part because that data is available, but arrests alone, however, don't fully capture the full approach. So, the broken windows model also suggests a long-term indirect link between disorder enforcement and a reduction in serious crime. And so, the evaluations may not be appropriately evaluating the broken windows intervention. So we'll explore that a little bit more. The book goes into it a little bit more on the broken windows type of policing. So proactive policing and direct patrol. Pros, cons. Making more arrests. Pros, cons. Do these things affect crime? Rapid response. 911 calls. Does that be already not so much? You'd have to actually catch the person. Broken windows policy, disrupting the early disorder and low-level crimes before the serious stuff rolls in. And now we're going to switch to using technology. The use of technology on patrol. The book mentions a few. Those are the only ones I'm going to touch on, but there are tons. There's tons of others type of technology that patrol uses. CompStat, it's a computer program originated in New York City that allows police to collect and review crime data so they can implement effective policies and patrols, and basically gives up-to-date information on where crime is occurring. It also includes data and maps, and since its inception, it has proven successful in making a contribution in the drop in crime in New York City. And this technology is right at their fingertips. They have it. They also have cameras, and they have computers in their patrol cars now. I think most of the cars are equipped with some form of cameras that they're able to capture if they're chasing somebody, high-speed chase. But even if they pull a car over, the camera is catching what is happening in front of them. The police also wear body cams now. They also have recordings that they wear. Everything that they say and do is recorded. Automated license plate recognition. It's on page 115. I want to talk about it a little bit. The license plate readers. The purpose is to scan for stolen vehicles and persons of interest. The question becomes, is it helpful or harmful? Can you see abuse? Is that an invasion of privacy? Isn't it a type of surveillance? Absolutely. I've known especially the troopers who use that to profile. They'll just run at 2 a.m. What they're patrolling for is people leaving the bar scene, right? Bars are closing and they want to catch some DWIs. So they run the license plate, and they hope for that somebody's operating their vehicle without a license or a suspended license, or they didn't pay a fine somewhere, so they have a reason to pull them over, and then they can say, hey, have you been drinking? That is a common approach. But it's certainly used for other things, and to make sure, to resolve stolen vehicles and persons of interest and so forth. But the automated license plate readers, they're a high speed and they're computer controlled camera system. How about those folks on top of the in big cities? They have them on top of street lights when you run a light or you might be speeding, and they nab your license plate and they send you a ticket. Those things exist out there as well. That helps with the patrol and certainly patrolling traffic. Constitutional issues have been raised regarding those, because all of a sudden you get a ticket and it's like, send it in, And if you try and, you're entitled to have to go to court. You're entitled to go to court and have your charge read to you. We talked about all that in the system, chapter 2, when we went through the court system. So anyhow, technology is great. There's a lot more of it that's at their fingertips. The question is, does it help with deterring crime or preventing crime? There's no information that I have available for us to review on that, but it certainly helps in any investigation. So that's the patrol. We're going to turn to their job of investigating in the next video.